4 years ago, I took my youngest sister and her 2 friends trick-or-treating. I'm 18 now. I was obviously 14 during the time of this story, and my youngest sister was only 7 at the time, along with her 2 friends, who, of the 2, I'll only name one, Mary, for privacy reasons. I didn't have plans anyway, so I guess I was actually a bit happy that my parents made me walk with them. Plus, I low-key told my sister to fill an extra bag for me at each house. By now, we were more than a mile away from my house. The girls' bags were all pretty full now, and I was ordering them to start making their loop back in the direction of our house. The girls were approaching the front door of a corner house across the street from an old, closed-off community park. The house already stood out from the rest on the block in that there was a 3-foot wooden fence surrounding the perimeter, except for the walkway and driveway, and a bunch of overgrown trees and bushes on the front lawn, almost completely blocking the actual house from view. They tried looking for the doorbell, but then called back to me that there wasn't one. I answered back, telling them to just knock on the door. My sister pounded on the door in 3 different intervals. Then I called for them to skip this house. As the 3 girls were walking down the stoop, the front door to the house creaked open, and somebody could just barely be seen poking their head out from behind the door, which was open just a crack. The girls walked back up the stoop and simultaneously yelled "trick or treat." From the sidewalk, all I could see was an arm reach out from around the door, and then the person's pointer finger lifting up as if to say 1 second. The arm kind of creepily pulled back into the house. My view of it not seeing a body made the situation really eerie. The door closed, and for what felt like 20 seconds, they just stood there on the stoop. I was about to ask them what was going on, but once again the front door to the house cracked open. Once again, just an arm came into view for me. This time I could see him waving the girls to come into the house with his hand. My sister and her 2 friends were actually making their way into the house before even looking back at me for approval. At this point, the feeling in my stomach told me something wasn't right here, and I yelled to the girls to come back. The really disturbing part was as soon as I yelled this, the person shut the front door, almost slamming it in their faces. The 3 girls came back over to me. I told them that was enough trick-or-treating for the night. I nudged them to continue walking forward, keeping my eyes on the house. Barely through the overgrown bushes in front of the house, I saw the blinds to one of the front windows rustling around, and an older man sitting by the window. We continued walking home now. The girls told me the man initially said, "1 second while I go get the candy," and then shut the door. When he came back out, he whispered to come inside to get the candy. I was considering calling the cops and reporting this guy, but I wanted to get home and see what my parents had to say first. We were probably halfway down the block when I turned around and saw a person standing by the corner of the block right where the house was. We made it back to our house where I told my parents. They called my sister's friend's parents, and when they got there, we all had a long conversation about it. We then all drove over to the house in separate cars, with my mom talking with the 911 operator in the car. When we got to the house, we learned before the cops even arrived by a neighbor that the house had been vacant for months. Mary's dad was the quickest one to realize what was actually going on here. A sexual predator, or maybe even worse, was hiding in the house for Halloween, waiting to lure unsuspecting kids into the house to snatch them. And what scares me the most to this day was that my sister and her friends were about to enter that house before I told them not to. Halloween can be a very dangerous holiday. Two years ago, I was home on Halloween, and for the most part, it was a pretty normal day. Since Halloween was on a Friday, all of my friends were out partying. However, I was doing homework. Not one of my most exciting nights, but I didn't mind too much. I really had to get this homework done anyway. My mom and dad were handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters as they usually do. My house doesn't usually get many because we're pretty much the only house on the block that hands out, so it's often ignored because it's not worth their time. Tonight was no exception. Later that night, my mom calls me down and tells me to watch the door for trick-or-treaters because my neighbors had come over asking for help with their costumes for a party. So my neighbors and my parents both went upstairs to work on the costumes, leaving me alone downstairs. It didn't bother me because I had finished my homework and I could just play my PS4 while listening for knocks on the front door, which was close by. Only a couple more trick-or-treaters came in about an hour. Pretty typical for this area. However, around 11 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. I thought it was pretty weird since it had almost been an hour since the last knock, and it was pretty late for trick-or-treaters to still be out. Regardless, I grabbed the candy and went to answer the door. It's important to note that there's a small room in between the front door and the living room. When we enter the front door, we make sure to lock the door behind us leading to the living room so our dogs don't run up and start barking and whatnot. I did the same thing here. When I answered the door, there was a surprisingly large man, at least 6'3" tall with a somewhat muscular physique, standing in front of me wearing a Michael Myers costume. Not a cheap one either, it looked pretty expensive for a costume. He stood in front of me but didn't say a single word. I thought it was pretty unusual because it's kind of customary to say trick or treat. But nope, he didn't do a thing but stare at me. It was almost like he was a statue. I thought he was really trying to sell the character and creep me out, and it was working. I was feeling a little intimidated because I'm pretty small for a guy, only about 5 feet 10 inches tall. I decided to break the awkward silence and say trick or treat for him while handing him some candy. I couldn't believe what he did next. In response to me handing him candy, he took a few steps into my house. This was when I started getting really uncomfortable. You're supposed to take the candy, say thank you, and go. It's like an unspoken rule that you don't walk into people's houses without permission. It was at this moment that I also noticed that he didn't have any type of bag for candy. This was a huge red flag, because I realized then that he was not there to trick or treat. Before I could respond, the man reached into his pocket and pulled something out. I didn't want to look at it, but I was assuming it was a weapon, and I had no idea what to do. I'd locked myself into a small room with a psychopath much larger than me holding a weapon, blocking the only exits. We all like to pretend and make up scenarios in our heads where we have to be the hero and save the day, but here I was, stuck in a real-life situation, completely unable to move, not able to save myself. I was frozen in fear. It was such a weird feeling, almost like I was dreaming the entire thing. I had no control over my body. And what a cliche way of dying I thought it would be, getting stabbed to death by someone dressed up as Michael Myers on Halloween. Thankfully it didn't go like that, because without warning, the guy takes off his mask and jokingly says, "I'm just messing with you, bro." I'm still frozen in shock and can't respond in any way. He then says, "I scared you though, right?" Completely confused and still afraid, I managed to respond with, "Yeah, you got me." He put the knife back in his pocket, which gave me a huge sign of relief, and said, "I didn't really come here to trick or treat, but can I have that candy anyway? I'm really hungry." I didn't hesitate to give him the candy because he creeped me out, and he still did have a knife. He then goes on to mention how he just left his friend's Halloween party and he saw my lights on and decided to prank me. It was obvious that he was drunk and high and thought knocking on someone's house pretending to be Michael Myers qualifies as a good prank. He mentions how he owns a tattoo place about an hour away from here, and even says that I'm pretty chill and that we should hang out sometime. He tells me to put his name and number in my phone so we could chill soon. I make sure to take his name and number down. After all, the last thing I wanted to do was upset this weird guy still blocking my only exit with a knife. I basically agreed to everything he said because I was still terrified and just wanted the conversation to end as soon as possible. But this conversation seemed to go on for hours. Despite this, I still didn't feel comfortable or safe. I had to find a way to get this guy out of my house. There was something way off about him, and I got vibes that he was a dangerous person. So I decided to make up a bullshit lie and say that I had something cooking in the oven that I needed to check on and that I'd text him later. And it worked. He said okay and turned around to leave my house. I could not close and lock the door quick enough when he left. My heart was still beating so fast that I thought it was going to burst from my chest. That was easily the most terrifying and weirdest experience of my life. I decided to not contact the police though, since the guy didn't have any malicious intent. I guess he was just completely out of it and just a overall really creepy person. I still have his number to this day, but we've never texted or called each other, just the way I'd like it. As terrifying as that situation was, I can laugh at it now and use it as an interesting story to share with my friends, so I guess one good thing did come from it. Just be careful who you open your door for on Halloween. There's some very weird and messed up people out there. I got lucky this guy wasn't a complete psychopath, because nothing was stopping him from stabbing me. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday, but ever since one not-so-sweet round of trick-or-treating, I've kind of switched over to liking Christmas the most. 2006, I was 14 years old. Me and Johnny, my best friend at the time, were going trick-or-treating together. I remember it was a Tuesday night, so everyone had school the next day. That meant the craziness with the teenagers going around with TP and shaving cream wasn't as extreme, nor was anything really. My parents wanted me back by 11 o'clock the latest, same with Johnny. It was around 8:30, I would constantly check my wristwatch. We were down a bunch of blocks close to the woods and the highway by the east end of town. This would likely be our last year of trick-or-treating, so we were trying to get as much candy as possible. We rang doorbell after doorbell. As the night wore on and the amount of kids outside lessened, the number of people answering their doors also decreased. Then it started to drizzle, and that's when it really became a ghost town outside. But that didn't stop us. We were now 3 houses down from the house that was commonly known around there as Hell House. It was nicknamed this because of the alleged murder that happened inside decades ago, plus the fact that the house looked like it was built over 100 years ago and stuck out from the other houses 2 miles away. There was even a whole webpage dedicated to the house with a little lore behind it. I don't really remember the full details anymore. The website is down now, but at the time nobody seemed to know if anybody lived there or not. At the time I was sure the neighbors knew, but we didn't live very close to the house. Long story short, me and Johnny were feeling brave and cocky, so we hopped the creepy fence surrounding the seemingly abandoned property and walked up to the stoop, which was made out of ancient and worn-out looking red bricks. We knocked on the door a few times since there was no doorbell. The drizzle turned to rain, and we suddenly didn't want to move out from under the front awning. Johnny jokingly knocked on the door again, but my focus was shifted to walking home in this rain. Suddenly, a loud thud made us both jump. Johnny said it sounded like it came from a window upstairs, to which I replied, "Let's leave." We walked quickly back down the red brick pathway, hopped over the front black graveyard-like gate, and stopped to look back at the house on this dark, rainy Halloween night. Johnny bumped me on the shoulder and pointed to the upper middle window of the house, and I felt like my heart dropped from my chest when I saw somebody clear as day staring down at us. Only there was something so disturbing about this person's face. I couldn't tell what it was through the rain and foggy window, but I swear that face and just this whole scene seemed like something you would see in a horror movie. We both jumped once again when the person at the window quickly and aggressively turned and seemingly ran away from the window. All we could assume was that they were coming outside after us. We quickly went to hide by the neighbor's fence, which was facing the backyard of the house. The sound of the rain thankfully masked the sound of our breathing and whispering. This neighboring fence was made of wood and had a bunch of holes, allowing us to peek through to the lawn next door. Suddenly, the entire fence started to shake a little, yet we couldn't see anyone on the other side, and we were certain it wasn't us who had done it. Johnny and I agreed it was time to make a run for it back to my house. We both stood up, and when we turned to run, I saw something at the edge of the fence. At first I was confused as to what it was due to the darkness, but it soon hit me that this was a person leaning over to this side of the fence, exposing their body down to their waistline with one arm reaching around the fence. The way this person was positioned and staring at us made for a horrifying scene and memory. We dropped our candy bags and ran for it. After running 5 blocks and my getting a few cuts and bruises from tripping twice in the rain, we got back to my house. We agreed not to say a word given that what we did could probably get us in trouble. The really scary part is the next day, after school, we went to go ask some of the neighbors over there if they knew who lived there, and they all gave the same response. They had no idea if anybody lived there or not. They never saw a car in the driveway or anybody outside. One of the neighbors even pointed out that the house had a for sale sign very briefly a few months prior, but disappeared within a few days. We told all of the neighbors our story, and they were all very disturbed by the news. I moved out of that neighborhood in 2007 the next year, and I've never had to worry about the story behind that house or who's living there since. All I know is something strange was going on inside of that house, and I kind of wish I found out what. It was Halloween night of 2007, freshman year in high school, and I was with my friends, Ivan, Ryan, and Jesse. We were all dressed as the Super Mario characters. I was Luigi since I was the second tallest, Ivan was Mario since he's short and buff. Not that Mario is buff. Jesse was Waluigi because he's freakishly tall and skinny, and Ryan was Wario because he's just really fat. So they were the perfect group costumes for us. We live in a very non-congested suburban neighborhood with a decent amount of space in between houses. On Halloween, that's the worst thing ever. Less bang for your buck. We were trick-or-treating for hours, way past dark, and eventually came the time when most trick-or-treaters were heading home. My feet started to hurt, and I had to constantly switch arms for holding the now 10-pound pillow sack of candy, but we planned on going until our bags were completely full. A lot of the houses by now weren't answering anymore. It was probably past their cutoff time for giving candy to trick-or-treaters. Approaching our next house, we saw a purple bucket on the stoop, which was the best feeling ever. I was the one to get close enough to realize it was empty, which was the worst feeling ever. I turned around when I heard a knock at the window of the house. We all looked at the window. Couldn't see anyone, but heard someone call out, "Wait." The door opened and an older man, late 40s, already balding, stepped outside. He told us to come inside so he can get us some more candy. I said we could just wait out here. He responded saying something along the lines of, "Nonsense, come on in, we'll get you your candy." Ivan stepped in and said, "It's alright. Come on Dan, let's go." I told the guy to take care and apologized. He just stood there watching as we walked off, not saying anything. I felt bad, but at the same time, that guy seemed like a creeper, and I figured I just dodged a bullet not going in there. If the story ended there, it wouldn't be scary, so of course, it didn't end there. We skipped a few of the guy's neighboring houses just to get further away, and continued on with our business. We were walking down close to the nature preserve now, so there weren't many houses around us. At this point, we were now walking back closer to Jesse's house. I noticed Ryan had stopped walking, and I turned around to see what's up. He said he heard someone moving from behind the trees in the preserve. Now this was before everyone's phones had flashlights, so we couldn't just go searching in the woods for someone. Besides, we were just telling Ryan that it must have been a raccoon or something. You may think this is a bit of a cliche, but when things like this happen in real life, you always assume the more logical possibility. It's just natural. Why would we assume we were being followed? I had to put my arm around Ryan's shoulder and nudge him forward. A little ways down the street, me and Ivan picked up on the sound as well. When we all stopped, the sounds of the footsteps from beyond the trees stopped as well. Ivan yelled at the obvious stalker to go away, or we would beat the shit out of them. I knew he was just bluffing though. I could hear the nervousness in his voice. The snap of a twig from beyond the trees triggered a fight-or-flight response in all of us. Me, Jesse, and Ryan all ran for it. Ivan was at first charging to attack, but he quickly followed after realizing we had all taken off. We ran down the dark street, and we all noticed the sounds of at least 2 or 3 pairs of footsteps crushing the twigs and leaves in the woods. We banked it hard right down Jesse Street when it finally came up, and ran straight for his backyard, entering his house through the back door. The first thing we did was peek out through his living room window. We couldn't see anyone. We all had to gather our thoughts and discuss what the hell just went down in his living room, when all of a sudden we heard Jesse's backyard gate slam shut. Jesse dove to turn off the lights. There was a click and a bang from down in the den. It was more than likely Jesse's back door. We all agreed to go down armed with knives and face them. Jesse turned on his back door light, but there was nobody out there. Just then the front door opened, and we all screamed like animals. Jesse's mom and sisters came rushing downstairs. They had just gotten home from their friend's little house party. We all rested assured knowing it was just them. Jesse explained what happened, but made it seem a lot less dramatic. Me and Ivan went home after that and called it a night. At 12:30 a.m., I got a disturbing text message. It was from Jesse. It said, "It wasn't my mom." I texted back saying, "What?" He responded back quickly, saying, "It wasn't my mom in the backyard." My fingers slammed the buttons on my phone, responding back, "What do you mean?" There was a long pause before he finally told me that his mom and sisters said they never went in the backyard. I told him to immediately check the backyard from his upper deck. He had already done just that. He also told his mom everything, and she had already called the police. They didn't find anyone back there, but Jesse did mention the guy who invited us in while trick-or-treating. Nothing ever became of that, and nothing ever happened at Jesse's house again after that one Halloween night. Last Halloween, I was asked to chaperone my little brother Kevin, my little cousin Mike, and his friends while they trick-or-treated. No, I wasn't the typical cliched teenager that was pissed off because I had better things to do. I was perfectly content with hanging out with my little brother, my little cousin, and his friends. I was 18 years old, so I was a bit old to actually be collecting candy myself, so I asked my little brother to carry a smaller bag and put some candy in there for me at each house. By the time that small plastic bag was full, I was asking the kids if they were ready to go home, and every time I would ask, they would say no. They insisted on filling their bags to the top, but that was out of the question. I had enough, so I started leading them back in the direction of Mike's house. Suddenly, a white van pulled up next to us. The driver rolled down the passenger side window and asked me if I could help him out with something. "Nah, I gotta get these kids home," I said, as I directed my attention back to the group. He said he just needed me to fix his passenger seat into the upright position, as it was a two-person job, and he said he had a date. I told him it would have to be quick. He parked his car and told me to get inside. I opened the door and began fidgeting with the seat. He was telling me to lift, and then I would lift. He would then say, "Put it back down." I'm gonna be honest, I thought this guy was just flat out dumb, until I heard the kids screaming outside. There was somebody trying to grab one of Kevin's friends. I almost fell on my face as I tried to get out of the van. When I did, I grabbed him by the throat and began to strangle him. The driver came out and shoved me to the floor and attempted to grab Kevin, but the owner of the house we were in front of came out front with a rifle in his hand. He fired a shot in the air, a warning shot, and with that, the two creeps hopped back in their van and drove off. I tried to grab a hold of one of them, but I wasn't quick enough. The van was gone down the street before I could even take 5 steps after getting up. I couldn't express enough gratitude to that old man who came out with the rifle. I wish I could say the story ended there, happily, but unfortunately the next day while watching the news, there was a report of a missing 9-year-old boy in our town. Now, I usually believe in coincidences, but I know that wasn't any coincidence. And I know for the rest of my life, it will kill me, remembering how I could have prevented a kidnapping had I just grabbed a hold of one of those guys. Me, my best friend Jordan, and my friend Chris were trick-or-treating on Halloween night. We live in a really rural side of Pennsylvania, and Halloween always kind of sucked because of that. For all you city and urban kids, Halloween is a lot different when you live in a quiet, rural area. First of all, and most obviously, the walking distance between houses is much worse. However, people tend to give more candy to us since they get less trick-or-treaters. And that's the second thing, less trick-or-treaters. It's actually kind of rare to see other people trick-or-treating by us, mainly because we live in the middle of East Bumblefuck. So it didn't feel as festive or just Halloweenish. I'll tell you right now, it felt a lot spookier though, walking down foresty roads all alone with your group, only with the occasional house. And for that, maybe it was a perfect place for Halloween. It was our first house of the night. I remember the kind old man who answered had a huge bowl of Kit Kats and Snickers. He poured at least a pound of candy into each of our bags. It was great. Our next house was quite some hike away, but once again, the woman who answered was very friendly and gave a very generous amount of candy. After about 6 houses, our bags were starting to get heavy, but you have to realize it took almost half an hour to hit those 6 houses. We reached the entrance of the dirt road leading to smaller houses and trailer homes. The first 2 houses on this dirt road we tried didn't answer, so we decided to try one more on this road before turning around to find another area. We reached the very appropriately eerie property of a smaller house along the dirt path.
The whole front yard had an orange glow because of the 4 torches that were lit up leading to the front porch. There was an orange bowl on the stoop decorated with black silhouettes of witches, pumpkins, and other Halloween themes. Besides 2 stray Tootsie Rolls, the bowl was empty. There was a sign on the door that read, "If there is no more candy, enter the back at your own risk for more." Under that there was an evil-looking smiley face, along with an arrow pointing to the backyard. Chris said let's just turn around and go back, but Jordan and I wanted to go around back. It seemed interesting, as if they had something cool set up. Chris had no choice but to follow us around the house to the backyard, which was a small clearing from the miles of forest that surrounded. The backyard was lit up orange as well, but not as brightly. There was a single torch that sat in the middle of the small yard. It provided enough orange light to see a note on the back door. We got closer to the back door and read the note. It was some kind of riddle. It said, "If candy is what you desire, then you have to look closer to the fire." And yes, I still remember that stupid riddle to this day. So of course we assumed that by the fire meant by the torch. Chris was saying he did not like this, that it seemed too suspicious. I was kind of weirded out a bit too, but Jordan seemed interested in it, and I didn't want to seem scared to him. Plus, it was the most interesting thing to happen all night in this boring town. There was nothing around the torch though. It was literally just dug into the center of the backyard. There was a small wooden shed by the corner of the clearing, and in the other corner were a bunch of tools and wood scattered across the grass. Jordan tried leading us closer to the woods, but I was with Chris now. I was pushing for Jordan to just leave now, as it was too weird and creepy to be looking for candy in a stranger's backyard. He kept telling me, hang on, 1 more minute." While he was looking around, I started to examine the place. The house had an old, dirty look to it, surely a very low-income home. I started to examine the windows. One of them was cracked, the other had blinds closed, and then I looked up at the upstairs window. There was somebody looking down at us, specifically at me. When he or she noticed me, they moved away from the window and shut the blinds. I told Jordan we should go. I looked over to the window of the wooden shed. I could see someone poking their head out ever so slightly. I grabbed Jordan, yanking him over to follow me, but he was frozen still. He was looking up at the woods. I looked to see what he saw. There was a person coming out from the woods. Jordan was laughing. I guess he thought it was supposed to be a part of this spooky setup. I watched with him until we saw the person come into light, wearing a genuinely horrific mask. And there was something in his hand. A machete. Jordan still thought it was a joke. Even Chris seemed to be laughing a bit. Hell, I started to think it was all just a nice little Halloween setup. Until the person wearing the mask charged at Jordan and swung the machete, only he missed as Jordan backed up in time. We all sprinted back out front where we saw somebody blowing out the torches. He spotted us and started chasing us. We ran all the way down the dirt road, back down the paved road, and made it back to my house. Jordan was throwing up. I'm not sure if it was because of running so much, or because of the fact that he almost lost his life. We told my parents right away. My dad called the police and asked them to come to the house. My dad then drove us to the house where it happened, with the police following us. By the time we got there, everything was gone. And by everything, I mean the notes, the torches, and the candy bucket. The house had been vacant for months. Nobody was living there. It was the perfect place to set up a murder scene. We requested the police go inside to check, as I did spot somebody spying on us from upstairs. But it turned out they were gone as well. We did the best we could to describe what happened and the people I saw. I believe one of the officers told my dad they would investigate further into this and thanked us for the info. Maybe you don't realize how sick this world is, full of insane, scary, messed up people, until you actually come into encounter with them.
I experienced a sketchy situation on Halloween a couple years ago. My cousin came over for Halloween that year just to go trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and I know that's a bit old for trick-or-treating, but hey, it's free candy. My cousin was also 15, and we were planning on taking it easy that Halloween and just hitting enough houses to make a reasonable haul before we went home. My friend and his younger brother went with us, but we eventually went our separate ways. It was pretty busy, and there was a whole lot of kids at every house with decorations up. My cousin Jack and I decided to hit some of the houses with lights on with no kids already on the front stoops. Lots of houses that we had already hit before that had no decorations up and had lights on all had people inside ready to deliver candy to trick-or-treaters. But all the other kids I know for a fact target the heavily decorated houses. We ended up getting through like 4 houses in a minute because of no lineups. The next house in the line was not decorated at all, but there was a light on, so we thought we'd give it a shot. We knocked on the door, and immediately an older man opened the door. He opened it completely, which revealed 5 other guys just standing there. They were much younger than the older man who opened the door. I'm guessing they were in their late 30s, while the older man who opened the door was in his early 50s. He held out a bowl of candy, then reached in and grabbed some and put it in each of our bags. The older man asked Jack what his name was, and Jack responded to his question using a fake name. Jack said bye before the older man could say anything else. We walked off the front stoop, and alarms immediately started going off in my head. Jack seemed alarmed as well, and we started talking about how sketchy that was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we opened the door? Why were they all acting so strange? Those were the questions that were floating around in my head. Jack and I were a little spooked because of how weird that was. We went to 2 more houses, then we started walking to my house. Jack and I glanced back at that house to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove up the way we were walking and started slowing down right next to us. The roads were clear, and all the trick-or-treaters were on the sidewalks, so there should have been no reason the car slowed down right next to us. We picked up the pace a bit, and that's when another car sped up behind them, eventually beginning to go the same pace as the first car. I recognized the guy driving the first car, and the guy driving the second car. The guy driving the first car was the older guy who gave us the candy, and the driver in the second car was one of the 5 guys just standing there suspiciously. There was also somebody in the passenger seat in the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of the person. When Jack and I were 2 houses away from my house, we saw the first car park right across the street from my house. We didn't even see where the second car went, we just bolted back inside my house. Our parents, who were sitting in the living room talking, asked us what was wrong. We told them the whole story, and when we were finished, we went to the window to check if that car was still parked across the street, and it was. But then 5 seconds after I checked, it drove off. It had probably been parked there for the 5 minutes since we went inside my house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted Jack and I to go show our dads the house where all those guys were in. But eventually, our parents calmed us down and told us it was just a Halloween gag or something. Though I have my own theory on what was going on. The reason why there were 6 guys in the main doorway was because when a lone trick-or-treater or group of trick-or-treaters much younger than Jack and I came to the door, they were looking to jump or snatch them. But when they saw that Jack and I were teenagers and literally the same height as them, they decided to play it cool, even though they still looked sketchy. And why they were following us in their cars, we will never know. But when the night ended and everyone was off to bed, I realized that house is only 1 block from my house. This was many years ago. My old buddy Anthony and I were getting on our costumes to go trick-or-treating. We started going house to house just like a normal night. We got to the old part of our neighborhood, where our parents would tell us not to go because we were only 12 years old and we didn't know our way around there. We walked up to the first house there, and a nice lady opened the door who gave us big Hershey bars. After that, while we were walking to literally only the second house in this part of the neighborhood, this random guy came screaming and running towards us down the street. He came out from behind a church. We thought it was just a Halloween prank at first, like anyone would, so we stood there just laughing. But as soon as he got up to us, he tried taking the pillowcase full of candy out of my hands, so my buddy Anthony started hitting him with his pillowcase. By the time we got to this old neighborhood, we had a lot of candy, so being hit with that pillowcase surely had to hurt. Anthony was hitting him until he let go of the pillowcase and started running away. We thought that was the end of him, until we started walking back, extremely shocked and confused. I called my mom and asked her if she could pick us up because we were pretty far from home, and that whole experience kind of made us want to get off the streets. As soon as she got to our location, we explained what happened, and she almost didn't believe us. That's how ridiculous it sounded. We got home around 10 p.m., and shortly after that, there was a knock at the front door. My dad figured it was just a late-night trick-or-treater, so we went to answer the door, and standing there was a man in a jumpsuit with a Michael Myers mask. My dad was confused because he was wondering what he was doing out alone trick-or-treating, and based on his height and build, he looked like an older man, not a kid or a teenager. Either way, my dad just gave him candy and didn't really care to say anything. But while Anthony and I were sitting on the couch, we noticed him staring at us, like his masked face was staring right at us in the living room. I felt slightly unsettled by it and was waiting for him to just turn and leave. My dad ended up shutting the door in his face when he wouldn't walk away. So fast forward to like 1 in the morning. We were about to go to bed, but on our way upstairs, we heard a knock at the door. There was no way I was opening the door at that hour, and I knew this couldn't be anything good this late. So I went to tell my dad there was a knock at the door, and he said just ignore it. So Anthony and I go up to the room and turn on a movie. Anthony heard something though, and told me to mute the TV, and when I did, I heard it too. It was the sound of leaves crackling in the backyard. I looked in the backyard, and I saw that man in the Michael Myers costume, swinging on the swing set in our yard, staring into my bedroom window. I felt like my heart jumped out of my chest and up into my throat. It's like he was purposely recreating a scene from a horror movie to scare us. I ran into my dad's room and told him that the man in the Michael Myers costume was on our swing set. He took on this expression of shock and concern just like ours, and he looked outside, but he didn't see anyone there. Then, right when we were looking, we heard a knock at the back door. My dad went downstairs to the door, but nobody was there. This man was toying with us, harassing us to scare us. It had to be a Halloween prank. My dad was equally concerned now. All of a sudden, I heard my mom scream in the other room. So Anthony, my dad, and I ran upstairs to see the man in the Michael Myers costume standing at the end of the bed staring at my mom. My dad told Anthony and I to run and call the police. My friend and I ran downstairs and grabbed the nearest phone. We called 911 and told them that a man dressed as Michael Myers had broken into our house. The operator asked if everyone was all right. I said he's upstairs, and my dad has him, but we needed cops immediately. She told me to stay on the phone and that police were en route to the house. From upstairs, there was the sound of my dad screaming, followed by their sliding window being pushed open. The two of us ran upstairs to see my mom and dad laying on the floor. My mom was crying, and my dad's nose was bleeding. My dad said the man jumped out through the window. When the police arrived, Anthony, my dad, and I told them everything we could. They did a sweep of the property inside and out, which took about 20 minutes, and the premises was clear. I think that might have been my last year trick-or-treating, and for good reason. I still wonder if the man that tried to take my candy was the man wearing the Michael Myers costume, and I deeply regret leaving that part out of the story we gave to the police. Halloween was always one of my least favorite days of the year. I never had a lot of friends in middle school or high school, so I never really had any plans on Halloween. In middle school, I didn't really go trick-or-treating, and in high school, I never really went to any Halloween parties. This was also at a time when my sister was away at college, so due to the fact that my parents were hardly ever home, I'd usually be home alone. This was one of many Halloween nights that I was left home alone. Halloween was on a Friday this particular year, so kids were out in droves and later than usual. My parents were gone for the week. My mom left a bunch of bags of candy for me to hand to kids. I got kind of sick of the doorbell ringing every 5 minutes all day, so eventually I just poured an entire bag of candies into a plastic bowl we had in one of the kitchen cabinets. My mom never really liked leaving a bowl on the stoop, but she wasn't there, so what was she gonna do? That lasted a good while because the constant ringing of the doorbell stopped for a couple hours at least, and when the bowl was empty, I refilled it. I wasn't expecting to hear the doorbell again the rest of the night because even if the bowl were emptied, I assumed people would know not to bother ringing the bell at a house with an empty bowl. So when the bell did ring again, I was not only surprised, but also felt a hint of annoyance. I ignored the first ring, but about 30 seconds later, there was another ring. This time I got up from my computer, pausing the game I was playing, and went down to check who was at the front door. I opened the door, and there were two guys in white vendetta masks holding small plastic bags with very minimal candy inside, it seemed. Neither of the two of them said trick or treat. They just ominously both stood there and then lifted up their bags and held them open. I said, "Hang on, I'll get more candy." I felt intimidated, if I'm being honest. I went to get the bag of Reese's and grabbed a few to put in their bags. When I dropped the candies in their plastic bags, one of them, I don't know which, asked in a monotone voice, "Are you home alone?" I said no, but with a stutter because the question scared me. I said, "My parents are here." Then I said, "Have a good night," and shut the door. I waited by the door listening to see if I'd hear them walk down the steps. I finally heard footsteps leaving, so I felt relieved and started going back upstairs. But that question, "Am I home alone?" kept haunting me. I couldn't just go back to my game after hearing that. And then I realized the possibility as to why they would have asked me that, because there were no cars at all in the driveway or in front of the house, yet the lights were on. Then when I, an at the time 14-year-old kid, opened the door, I probably looked like the easiest target ever. My paranoia was clearly justified though, because while sitting at my desk trying to get back into my game, I heard this loud bang from my window. I was on the second floor, so clearly something was just thrown at the window. My heart started to pound the inside of my chest again. In response, I turned off the computer screen and desk lamp to bring darkness into the room. I then looked out the window, and though I couldn't see anything out there because it was too dark, another object was thrown at the window right in front of me, this one scaring me even more than the last. It sounded like a rock. I instantly felt this intensifying sense of danger. I ducked back down behind the window and left my bedroom. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, only an iPod Touch, so I had to get to the kitchen house phone. I crawled my way down the stairs so not to be seen through any of the windows. I got to the kitchen phone and dialed 911, but I think they saw even just the light from the little screen of the phone, because there was suddenly an aggressive banging on one of the kitchen windows. By now I was on the phone with 911 begging for help. As I crouch walked out of the kitchen and towards the back door, I screamed, realizing there was one of the guys in the vendetta masks on the other side of the back door, trying to open it. I started screaming into the phone for help, but around the same time, a familiar voice was calling from the other side of the front door. It was our next door neighbor, Chris. I rushed to answer the door and he came in, clearly happy to see I was okay. He took the phone from me and spoke to the police for me. He saw the two masked men enter my backyard from his kitchen window and saw them throwing multiple things at the windows of the house. By the time any police officers arrived at the house, those two masked men clearly knew better than to have stuck around. Chris invited me to sleep at his place for the night just to be safe. He was good friends with my dad before he moved, so he really didn't mind helping me. Having good relations with your neighbors may just save your life one day, you never know. What I do know is this experience made me hate Halloween just that much more. My group of friends and I went to a local county haunted house attraction. It was by the edge of town. It opened every October of every year. It sat right by the woods appropriately, and had 3 attractions: the main haunted house, a corn maze, and a haunted trail through the woods. I guess I'll name my friends now. Rod, James, and Bud. That's not his real name, that's just his nickname. We started with the haunted house, which was decently high quality and had a few good scares. Then we made our way to the corn maze. It started out kind of slow, just a lot of turns through the corn we'd have to make. But then the scary antics began. A guy dressed as a freaky scarecrow man emerged from the corn and screamed at us, causing us to scream as well. He started to chase after us and we ran. I was in the back, of course, and the scarecrow was right behind me. Even knowing it's just a paid actor, you have this innate fear of something chasing after you where you just feel like you have to run away. Somehow, through the thrill of running away through the corn, I lost all of my friends. It seemed like all of us ran in different directions. I lost the scarecrow man though, and got back to the trail between the crops. This is where the nightmare began. I called and yelled and screamed for my friends as I made wrong turn after wrong turn. They never called back. In fact, it seemed there were no other visitors in sight. I had to finish the maze by myself. What choice did I have? I walked and walked for what felt like 20 minutes, and I heard bustling in the corn in front of me. I slowed my pace and kind of tiptoed past the noise. but it was pointless. Something reached out from the corn and grabbed my wrist and squeezed it tight. I actually cried out in pain and yelled, "Stop, you're hurting me." I was actually in shock how hard this paid actor was squeezing my wrist. Then he tried pulling me into the crops. I didn't see who it was, I just saw his hand and arm, covered by a black coat sleeve and black glove. I yanked myself out from the grip and backed away as the actor came out from the crops into the path. He was wearing a heavy winter coat, black jeans, and a blank black face mask. I didn't know what the costume was supposed to be, but I literally yelled, "Go fuck yourself, you actually hurt me." He started running at me, and naturally I turned and ran as fast as I could through the corn to lose him. I yelled back, "I'm reporting you," and I quickly lost him. After 5 minutes of running straight through the corn as opposed to following the maze of trails, I came to the edge of the maze and went to find an employee. I reported the actor to the employee, saying he used way too much force to the point that my wrist actually hurt. The employee said he wasn't sure who was wearing the specific costume I described, but that he'd look into it. I thanked him, and then I looked at my phone. I had a missed call from James. I called him back to ask where the three of them were. He said they tried finding me, then they gave up and went to the haunted trail in the woods. I said I'd meet them and hung up. I walked over to the start of the trail, where they had the Halloween ambiance blasting through a bunch of speakers placed throughout. I stepped into the woods, feeling like I was the only one around besides my friends. I tried playing catch-up to my friends, when I stopped in my tracks after spotting him again, blocking the path. It was the guy in the coat and black mask. He didn't even give me time to react or say something. Right away, he started legit charging full speed at me. I turned right and ran into the woods, expecting to lose him easier. This time I called back, "I'm calling the police." I wasn't actually, but I thought that might get this guy to just leave me alone. I ran deeper into the woods until I didn't hear him chasing me anymore. Then I sat down on the root of a tree to catch my breath. I had time to think, and one of my thoughts was, did that guy really follow me from the corn maze to here? Then I heard footsteps approaching, and of course, at that exact moment, my iPhone started ringing. I silenced my phone, but now the footsteps had stopped. I pushed myself up off the root quietly and leaned to the side to get a view past the tree. It looked clear. I started to run back towards the path of the attraction and immediately spotted him to my right. I said to myself, fuck it. I stopped and told him I'm suing the place because of him. But he didn't stop running at me. He got to me and pushed me to the floor. I didn't expect it. I was once again in shock. I got back up as fast as I could before he could get on top of me and booked it. He chased me, but when I got back to the path towards the entrance of the attraction, he stopped and turned around. I went straight to the little front office shack and asked for a manager. Some older guy greeted me, and I told him about the guy who was chasing me and attacking me. The man said they didn't have any actors wearing that specific attire, so he called the police, and eventually I got my friends to meet me where I was. I stayed to describe the happening to the police when they showed up. I didn't have any marks to show them, but they still took a report and the place was closed for the night. We all went home after that. I haven't been to any haunted attractions ever since. The year I turned 13, my friend invited me and 2 other friends to stay at his house on Halloween night. He had a fairly large house outside of our town, and it was the perfect place to go trick-or-treating. We decided it would be cool to go now to get sweets for a movie. So fast forward, we were near the end of our trick-or-treating, and at one house, a woman answered the door. She was tall and skinny with shoulder-length hair. Her house was disgusting. We could smell the odor of cigarettes from inside. She was quick to tell us that there were no more sweets left. However, she could go try to find something for us. After a couple minutes of waiting, she comes back with an old brown paper bag with old-looking candy inside. We kindly deny the bag and tell her we're getting picked up, so we better go. She grabs one of my friends and says, "No, please," but my friend pulls away from her, and then she quickly shuts the door. We knocked on a few more houses before hearing something going on near the parking lot of the housing complex. Someone exclaims, "They took my child, they took her, they took her." It was her, that woman. and that was my friend's parents' car that she was banging on. She was throwing herself at the car and hitting it with her fists. A couple of neighbors came out due to the commotion. They seemed to know who she was. They apologized to us and said it was a big misunderstanding. We quickly got into the car, and my friend's mom started driving us out. But we don't get far before the woman jumps in front of the car, claiming one of us was her child. The neighbors once again pulled her away. It was later that night, however, when things truly began. We stayed up late like any teenagers do at sleepovers, and we watched some scary movies. Out of nowhere, the light turned on in the hall. We could see it under the closed door of the bedroom. We assumed it was my friend's parents who were about to come in to tell us to get some sleep. However, no one came in. I decided to have a peep out the door. Nothing at all. My friends joined me to see why the lights suddenly turned on. Out of nowhere, my friend says, "It's her." And through a large window facing the backyard, we see that woman standing there, looking in. However, the second she saw us stare at her, she ran away. Disturbed by this, we came back inside the bedroom and locked the door. We were obviously quite shaken up by this. Who is she? What does she want? We sat around for an hour, nervous, on high alert. However, we eventually did somehow manage to fall asleep. That morning, my friend's mom told us the situation at the housing complex shook her up so much that she thought she had seen that woman standing over her bed in the middle of the night. My friends and I never even told her we saw that woman at the house that night, which led us to wonder, what if, just maybe what if, that woman actually was inside the house that night? Last year, Halloween was on a Wednesday, and because of that, I was home alone. My dad works nights, and my mom was staying with her sister because our parents weren't getting along at the time. My sister was away at college, so it was just me, left to provide for the trick-or-treaters. My dad bought a couple bags of Kit Kats and told me he expected them empty by the end of the night. I don't know why, but my dad takes Halloween seriously. I didn't get home from classes until around 6, so it was already dark and the kids were out in droves. The second I dropped my bag on the couch, the bell rang, and that went on for some hours. I was getting homework done later on in the night when the trick-or-treaters had mostly gone home. It was sometime past 9 though, I remember that much, and the doorbell rang once more. It was the first time in over half an hour. I went to open the door with a near-empty bowl of Kit Kats expecting some kids, but instead it was just this lone guy, maybe 35 years old. He waved at me with a neutral expression on his face. I didn't open the storm door. I kind of just watched him, ready to shut the door on him. He stopped waving, then reached for the handle to the storm door and pulled it open. At that moment, I slammed the door shut in his face and locked it. I texted my family group chat that some old guy just tried opening the door. My dad joked that if he does it again, go outside and teach him a lesson. I decided that was it with opening the door for the night. I went back up to my room to finish my homework. Soon, I heard yelling coming from outside. I lost my patience and eventually got up to see what was going on. I slid open my window and looked down, and there was that man again down below, looking up at my window, shouting at me. He was mainly yelling that he needed help finding his son. I didn't believe him for a second. I texted my family again. My dad just said, "Ignore it, he'll go away." I left my room and shut off the light so that he'd go away. Then I went to the basement, which had no windows. I hung out down there to do my work, and all was quiet for a while. Then, flick, the power went out. My initial thought, that man outside tinkered with the electric box outside of the house. I stayed in contact with my family the whole time. After a few minutes, I heard the floorboards creaking above my head. Someone, as if I couldn't guess who, was inside the house. My mom, dad, and sister all texted me to call the cops. I stayed put in the basement as it was the safest place at this point. The cops were en route. All I had to do was wait. The basement door then opened, and he stepped down the stairs, only halfway though. Even without power, a little bit of light from the upstairs poured into the basement, enough for me to see his legs. He was standing on the middle step of the staircase. And I swear, he just stood there for like 2 minutes. I heard him mumbling stuff. I won't even pretend I could understand any of it. After the longest, most painfully uncomfortable moment of my life, the man said into the basement, "I can see you." The whole time, his legs were actually facing me. Was he actually looking at me that whole time? Still, I didn't move, nor did he. He continued to stand there until there was a bang at the front door. Then he walked up the stairs, shut the door, and I heard creaking above again. I waited 20 seconds before running upstairs to the front door. By that time, it seemed the man had left my house, because the cops couldn't find him, even with my help. Stupidly, I left the back door unlocked, so he simply let himself in. As for the power, he messed with the electric box outside, as I predicted. I don't know if he did this on Halloween intentionally, or if it was just a coincidence, but something was wrong with that man. He didn't belong out in the streets. Halloween night. I don't know what year it was, but it was probably like 4 years ago, and it was a Saturday. I'll keep this short and to the point. My friend Tanner and I were set on doing something scary that night, and that ended up being a visit to the abandoned house way up the road from our campus. It was at the top of the hill, and some students referred to it as the Blair Witch House, simply because it sat all by itself on an enclosed property, and it had been abandoned for years. So, come 10 o'clock, Tanner drove us all the way up the road and parked his car in the dirt outside of the property. We walked up the hill to the house, and even just seeing the unlit house standing in the dark gave me goosebumps. We both came with backpacks full of tools like flashlights, knives just in case, and he even brought a crowbar. Surprisingly, he didn't need it though, because the front door was already cracked open. This is where the flashlights came in, because of course the inside was as dark as it gets. The house seemed to be scrapped for just about everything, because nothing was left except junk. Nothing very exciting. Then there was a thump from upstairs. Tanner and I looked at each other, and we agreed to go upstairs and check it out. He led the way up the stairs, which were extremely rickety. We got to the top, and there was a small hall with 3 doors. We passed the first room, which was a tiny bedroom with an old collapsed bed frame still in there. There was a second door on the left. This one led to an empty bathroom. There was one more door, this one on the right of the hall. We stepped inside. This bedroom was definitely the master bedroom. There was a bed frame sitting in the center of the room still. There was once carpet on this wood floor, which had apparently been ripped away over the years. We stepped fully inside the room, looking for what could have made the thumping sound. Then, bang. The door to the room slammed shut, and there was suddenly a white flash that filled the room. Then another. It seemed like camera flashes. Tanner screamed and opened the door back up to flee the room. I did the same. Neither of us looked for whoever was in there with us. In the moment, we were way too scared. We ran back to the car, and Tanner drove us back to campus. A week later, Tanner sent me a picture through text. He was holding a photograph in the picture. It was of the 2 of us in that bedroom of the house. He said they were left under his windshield wiper in the parking lot of our dorm building. I told him throw them away and park somewhere else from now on. We only told a few close friends about this, and we never went near that house again.
I was 22 years old, attending a Halloween party at my former best friend Nick's house, who died of a heroin overdose in 2013. Before his death, he would throw big Halloween parties every year at his house, as his parents routinely flew to New York every year to attend their own friend's party. He was always a big Halloween freak, so the whole house was littered with truly horrifying props that we all knew Nick spent way too much money on. He even put up giant walls of cardboard and covered them with wallpapers to create a haunted maze of sorts. I want to keep this story PG-13 rated, so I'll skip the weed, beer, LSD, and sex and get right to the part where things got bad. I'll admit, we weren't in our right minds. None of us were. Anyone who came to Nick's parties knew what went down. Me, Nick, and a few other guys, Vinny G, Joey, and Q, were upstairs in Nick's room smoking a bong when we heard two steady, loud bangs come from downstairs. Nick clumsily but panickingly rushed to open the door and see what was going on. There were sounds of screaming of both guys and girls. I remember quite clearly it sounded as if there were a crowd of people screaming for their lives down there. We all called Nick to come back in and shut the door. Even under the influence of drugs, we all knew what was going on. Nick ran back inside and shut the door quickly but also quietly, locking it behind him. He turned to us and had on the facial expression of someone who had just witnessed murder. "What did you see? What's going on?" we all shouted at him. He told us to hide before anything else. We all knew why. From that point on, we didn't ask questions. Nick hid the lights and hid in the closet with Joey, while I hid under the bed with Q, and Vinny G hid in the storage box. We could hear the blasting music from downstairs turn off, followed by a grown man screaming at everyone to shut up. One unfortunate girl let out a scream of shock and fear, and after another bang, silence. The man started shouting at everyone again, but personally I couldn't hear it too well, and I certainly as hell wouldn't remember exactly what he was shouting. We heard two other men shouting. By now there were a confirmed 3 intruders in the house, but there could have been more for all we knew at that point. We heard the sound of boots stomping up the stairs and then coming halfway down the hall and stopping outside the bedroom door. The intruder on the other side of the door tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he started ramming into the door with most likely his shoulder. After a few failed attempts at that, the sound of a few shots to the doorknob were clearly enough to break the lock, allowing the door to swing open. We heard cries from downstairs after the shots to the doorknob, followed by silence and gunshot. Me and Nick had our hands on our mouths to shield our breathing noises. I watched through the transparent cloth that hung from the bottom of Nick's bed as the black boots with overlapping ripping denim jeans moved instinctively to the closet. He opened the door. I could hear Nick begging for the intruder not to kill him, offering a generous amount of money if they would leave. Nick gave himself up as the house owner. That's when the intruder ordered him downstairs. The rest of us stayed put. Apparently Joey hadn't been caught with Nick. We stayed under the bed, shaking and afraid. There was near silence from downstairs, other than Nick talking with the intruders, but whatever they were saying was much too low for us to hear. It felt like a near 20 minutes before the front door slammed shut and Nick came running back upstairs to tell us that they were gone. I think the most horrifying moment of my life was when I stepped downstairs back into the living room and saw the 2 dead bodies laying lifelessly on the ground, holes in their heads spewing out blood. Jen and Robbie, 2 good friends that I still miss. I'll spare you the details of what happened when the police arrived, but despite the fact that the house smelled like a marijuana greenhouse, the police were more interested in finding out who the masked men were that killed 2 innocent college students. Oh yeah, Nicky told the 4 of us who were hiding in his room that there were 4 intruders in total, all wearing fedoras, vendetta masks, coats, and gloves. They demanded $100,000 in cash, and when Nick could not provide it, they demanded he fill their empty sack with his most valued possessions. All of the partygoers held hostage in the room were also forced to throw their wallets into the sack or they would be shot. After the incident, Nick became depressed. He started drinking too much, becoming an alcoholic. He stopped showing up to school and ultimately ended up dropping out. He started the use of heavier drugs, such as meth and heroin. I had one good talk with him since the incident, and he was more real during this talk than he had ever been. He told me, with tears rolling down his cheeks and a pipe in his hand, he lived in constant pain, knowing he caused the death of 2 of his best friends. Nick died of a heroin overdose in July of 2013, not even a year after the incident. It was my first Halloween living in my own house away from my parents. I live in a small corner house with a basement but no upstairs, a house my parents paid half for. It was 11 o'clock at night. I was sitting in the living room watching scary Halloween movies when I found myself getting up to answer a knock at the door. But then I stopped and thought, who could be at the door at 11 p.m.? Surely there were no more trick-or-treaters out. I had a pretty good feeling it was a late-night Halloween ding-dong ditcher, so I gave it a second, then I shot a glance to the porch through the window. They were gone already. Yup, ding-dong ditchers. I sat back down, not thinking twice about it, and again, knocking at the front door. "Get lost," I yelled. I was not in the mood for punky kids. They ignored my demands and started pounding now, not just knocking. I was pissed now. I leaped up and swung the door open. No one was there once again. I slipped on my shoes and headed outside to begin searching the bushes for the kids, but there was nobody in sight. Not in the bushes, not behind my car, not across the street. I was done answering. I didn't want to feed into their fun anymore, so I went back inside, double-locked the door, and went to my bedroom, also locking that door, just to feel safer, I guess. Even over the TV, I could still hear the stupid kids pounding on my front door repeatedly. I was so close to calling the cops to get them away, but that would undoubtedly lead to my house being egged or teepeed. The pounding continued for an uncomfortably long time, more than half an hour. I thought these kids must be filming something for YouTube and were desperate for a reaction, but I wasn't going to give it to them. At some point I dozed off with the TV on, only to wake up to the knocking again. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the fucking morning. How could those kids still be at it, I thought. I turned the TV off and sat up with my ears open. For a few moments, my heart completely stopped as I realized the knocking was not at my front door, but rather at my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, looking around my room like a madman for something to use as a weapon. They knew I was awake now. They were trying the doorknob, trying to bust down the door. These weren't any kids. By some miracle, I came up with an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I could think of. I turned on the receiver to my speaker system, plugged in my iPhone, brought up the YouTube app, typed in 45 gunshot sound effect, turned on the volume and pressed play. The sound of a gunshot echoed out of the speakers. It sounded real enough. I paused the video after the first shot and yelled, "That was a warning shot. Leave now or I won't hesitate to shoot you in the head." And it worked. I heard 2 pairs of footsteps stomping over my wood floors and out the front door. I gave it a moment before opening my bedroom door and peeking outside. They were gone, but the front door was left wide open. I quickly shut it, called the police, and that's where my story ended.
So I was never really a big Halloween person, mostly because I grew up without many friends, and once I passed the age of 10, I couldn't use the excuse of going with my mom anymore. And it's not like I had friends to go with. So this last Halloween, I was 14 years old. I do have a little sister who's only 8, so my mom went trick-or-treating with her. My one really good friend, Steve, already had plans and I didn't want to impose, so it didn't seem like I'd be trick-or-treating this year. I felt a tiny part of me explode with happiness on the inside when my mom asked me to stay home and hand out candies. Now I felt like I had a job to do that didn't involve me trick-or-treating alone like a loser. My mom left with my sister at about 6 o'clock, about an hour after she got home from work. She told me to expect her back around 9, so I was relaxing on the couch in the living room, watching the scary movie marathon on AMC, and occasionally answering the door to give candy to the kiddies. And while doing that, the kitchen phone began to ring. I remember the ringer was set so loud it actually made me jump. I picked up the phone, and the other end remained silent, except for a bit of fumbling and background noises. Sounds you'd expect when somebody's holding a phone. I think I said hello about 5 times before the person on the other end hung up. I just knew it was somebody pulling a Halloween prank call on me. What else could I do but ignore it? That worked well enough for the next few minutes of watching TV, answering the phone until the phone rang again. Same unknown number coming up on the caller ID. I wanted to see where this was going, so I picked it up once more. This time I could hear very faint breathing on the other end. "Alright, Steve, I know it's you," I said into the phone. They hung up. By this point, I didn't want to say I was scared, but I was for sure a bit uneasy. It was a long time before that phone rang again. It was getting later, darker. and the doorbell seemed to be ringing less and less. I was watching the original Friday the 13th when it happened again. The sound of that phone ringing had become sickening, as I knew who it would be, or rather, I didn't. For some reason, I gave in again and picked up. And once again, silence. Other than the faint breathing and fumbling of the phone. It was like this for almost half a minute before they finally spoke in an exaggerated deep voice.
"I'll be paying you a visit tonight."
I had enough of this joke. I told them to fuck off and hang up the phone, promising to myself not to pick it up again. I'd say about half an hour later, out of the blue, all the power in the house was cut. The lights went out. The TV turned off. Complete darkness. I stood up, now frozen in fear, when loud and angry thumping came from the front door. I completely lost it and began screaming like a girl, but there was something coming from outside. Laughter. I recognized that laughter. I opened the door and there he was. Stephen. I shoved him nearly down the steps out of anger. "So, that was you who made those dumb phone calls?" I asked. He nodded while laughing. "I didn't sound like you on the phone. Let me hear you do that voice again," I said. "What?" He seemed confused. "I didn't say anything, you idiot. I just called and did that heavy breathing." I thought he was lying at first. But then my heart dropped. I had him follow me to the fuse box outside. Just as I feared, it had been opened and all the wires had been snipped. I think we ran faster than any Olympic champions back into the house. I called my mom, who told us to stay inside and wait for the police, who she then called. The call was traced to a payphone outside of a nearby bar. I still wonder, was this just a dumb Halloween prank gone too far? Or was it a potential break-in, and God knows what else waiting to happen? I don't think I ever want to find out. When I was younger, my friends and I went trick-or-treating every year. This one particular year, as we were trick-or-treating, we passed a man who stood still with a mask on, holding a lantern. As we walked past him, he turned his whole body around and followed us with his eyes. We were creeped out, but there were plenty of people around, so we made our way to the next house. My friends and I saw him over and over again, as we made our way from house to house, and he seemed to be following us in typical horror story form. We walked so slow, we couldn't figure out how he kept up with us. At one house, when we hadn't seen him for a while, we got our candy. As we turned around to walk back to the street, the masked man stood in the road waiting for us. Immediately, we knocked back on the door and told the owners of the house about it. The masked man continued walking down the street, and we didn't see him again that night. Later on, an adult friend of the family told us he saw a masked man hiding behind a tree, waving little kids over, and he only backed off when he threatened to call the police.
I was trick-or-treating with my friend Casey. We were both 11 years old at the time. We were walking across a small wooden bridge over a small river that many called Jack Winkle River when a black Jeep pulled up on the other side of the bridge, basically blocking our way. We turned around and hurried away. We were the types of kids to obey the stranger danger rules. We could hear the windows of the Jeep rolling down, and a man with a raspy smoker's voice called for us to come back. He was yelling for help, asking us for directions. I yelled sorry, and we continued to hurry away. The Jeep couldn't fit over that small bridge, so it pulled away and drove down the road on the other side. We thought we had made our escape from the creepy driver, when here came an SUV barreling around the corner and down the street, slamming on the brakes in front of us. Once again, the driver rolled down the windows. Now with them right next to us, we could see there were 2 passengers in the car as well. An old guy with gray curly hair and a mustache in the backseat, who also had a raspy smoker's voice, told us to get in the car, that they have free bags of candy. The Jeep banged a 3-point turn and tailed us wherever we went. At one point, the Jeep finally accelerated past us, came to a stop, and the back and front passenger side doors opened, and the 2 creepy men stepped out lunging at us. We dropped our bags of candy and ran straight for my house, which was in sight now. We rang the doorbell desperately at least 20 times. The old men that were chasing us couldn't run fast, and when they saw us running to my house, they turned back. My mom opened the door and we screamed and pointed at the Jeep that was backing away in the other direction. She shoved us inside and locked the door and called the police like any mom would. She reported the black Jeep with 3 men inside, older looking, raspy voices, and any other descriptions we gave. My mom was freaking out all night, worried about the fact that they knew where we lived now. My dad tried to calm her, but she couldn't calm down. Ultimately, the police agreed to send an unmarked police car to stay out front and keep guard for 3 hours. That made my mom feel a little better, but what made us all feel better was when my dad woke us up to see the flashing red and blue lights outside of the unmarked police car. They had pulled over an SUV, a black Jeep, and 3 men were in cuffs. The 3 old creeps that tried to kidnap me and Casey. My dad went outside to talk to the officer and most likely confirmed that those were the men. Me and Casey went to the doorway and screamed at the men for their attention. They looked, and we both gave them the finger. My mom then pulled us back in and shut the door, sending us to bed. It went from the worst night of both of our lives to ultimately the best night of our lives. This story took place on Halloween night. I took my 7-year-old daughter Jamie trick-or-treating for a few hours, and when we got back, I cooked dinner, we watched TV together, and then I sent her to bed. I was feeling especially tired that night, so I brushed up and went to sleep. Shortly after, my daughter entered the room and told me there was someone in her closet. I assured her there was no one in her closet. She asked to sleep with me, but I once again assured her that she was safe in her room. She reluctantly went back to her room and shut the door. I made a mental note that if she came back again, I would walk her to her closet and show her that there's no one in there. Surely enough, 5 minutes later she came back. I asked her why she thought there was someone in her closet. She responded saying she heard someone moving around and things falling over. Honestly, when she said that, it kind of made my heart jump for a second. I walked her to her room and turned on the lights. I jokingly asked, "Is anybody in there?" We stood and listened. I didn't expect to hear anything. There it was, a thud from inside the closet. I screamed at Jamie to run to the neighbors and call the police. As she did, I swung the door open and was shocked to find the neighbor's son, Randy, sitting on top of my daughter's Lego box. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and yanked him up aggressively. I walked him angrily back to his parents' house next door and found Jamie ringing the doorbell. When they answered, I shoved him inside right into his father and explained everything. I told him I wouldn't press charges, but if I ever caught him near my daughter again, they would all be sorry. Randy's dad, Mark, slapped him across the face, then asked me to come inside to allow Randy to explain himself. Me and Jamie both went inside. Apparently, while I was taking Jamie trick-or-treating, he had snuck into our house through an open window and hid in her closet with his friend Daryl. I asked him if this Daryl kid was still in my house. He said yes. I told Jamie to wait with Mark while I ran back into my house, and right as I entered, there he was. This Daryl kid, uglier and shadier looking than Randy. He had my daughter's underwear in his hand. What I did next was completely out of fatherly protective anger. I grabbed the little shit by the throat and threw him to the floor, slapping him 4 times in the face, then hesitantly allowing him to get up and leave. The only reason I didn't call the police was because of my close friendship with Mark. But I made my point very strongly that if they ever so even waved to my daughter again, they would be in the news the next day. We went back to sleep. I let Jamie sleep with me after that incident. She was horrified. The next morning, I found a small drill hole in her closet door. The sick little bastards were spying on my daughter while she slept, at the same time playing with her underwear. Maybe you don't understand the horror of this story unless you're a parent, but there are many days where I think I made a mistake not calling the police. I still can, but nothing has happened since, and I figure I shouldn't create more trouble now. Jamie's 13 now, and that creep Randy has since gone away to college.
We had just moved into our large new house in Mississauga, Ontario, in an area called Winston Churchill. It was Halloween night, and my parents, my 4 other sisters, my brother and I were unpacking our stuff in our new bedrooms. We had just finished and were talking to each other about leaving our old schools and friends behind. My mother called us to do chores. I was really tired since it was 11:30 at night, way past the trick-or-treating buzz, and we had to do chores now? It seemed to take forever, but when I was done, I decided to go to my bedroom and get some sleep. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Thinking it was my brother or sister, I got up to shout at them for bothering me while I was sleeping, but there, as far as I could tell, there was no one there. I rushed down to the basement where my parents, sister, and brother were considerately working. I asked them all if they had been upstairs, and they replied no. Now I was getting pretty freaked out, but I had to believe it was just my imagination and shrugged it off as if it had never happened. I went back to my bed, which was now freezing cold. I had to put on a sweater. It was just too cold. I woke up in the middle of the night around 12:30 a.m., after everyone had gone to sleep. I heard this loud banging sound that seemed to be coming from my parents' bedroom. I thought it might be my brother or sister waiting to get a drink of water, but was too scared to go alone. I was wrong. The banging continued, getting louder by the minute. I couldn't get to sleep, so I decided to check it out. I walked into the hallway, and believe me, there was no one there. As I walked in, the banging seemed to stop. I stared at the door, only for a quick moment before deciding to go back to bed. After a couple of minutes, the banging started again. Now I was totally chilled to my very last bone. I tried to sleep again, but I couldn't. Very typical of me. The door to my bedroom creaked open, as if someone were pushing it lightly. But it was too dark to see who or what could have caused it. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Who is it? Let me go back to sleep. Very light footsteps began to move closer to my bed. I thought it was one of my sisters, until I turned onto my side after the footsteps stopped and saw a figure standing next to my bed. A figure at least 7 feet tall. I choked the urge to scream. Nothing came out. I lay there in unimaginable horror as the figure finally said, "Boo." That was when I screamed at the top of my lungs and covered my eyes, when my parents thrust open the door to my room and flicked on the light. There was no figure there. There was no figure by my bed. I cried out everything to them, the thumping, the figures. My siblings came into the doorway and watched me freak out. I asked my parents if they heard the knocking on their door. Surely they must have. It was their door after all. But they said there was no knocking. Not that they knew of. They all looked at me like I was crazy. But I know I'm not. You can't just imagine something like that. Something so real. I'll never forget this night. I know I won't. It was a few years ago, Halloween night. We were all 20 years old. Right at that age where going to haunted house attractions is one of the best things to do on Halloween. The attraction was called Scare House Journey to the Basement or something. It was only open for 4 straight years in our town. It was never heard of again. This was its 4th and final year of operation. It was a very high quality and surprisingly scary haunted house. One of the best ones I've been to. This was not a tour-guided attraction. It was a group exploration attraction. Basically, a maze where the only way out was to make your way to the basement, find one of the keys, Then find the exit and use the key you found to unlock the door. It was a very unique haunted house, that's for sure. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good night for us. And you're about to learn why. We started out in the living room of the house. To give as much detail as I can about the room, there was a giant open coffin sitting right smack in the middle of the room. There were very convincing spiderwebs covering just about every inch of every corner of the room. All the furniture was antique and dusty looking, and of course, blood was stained on the creaky wood floor. We could tell right away this haunted house was going to be great. The next room was the dining room. That was where things got creepy. The rooms following the dining room were all very dimly lit by artificial lanterns hooked onto the walls. On several occasions, actors jumped out at us in horrifically convincing costumes as expected. And yet they still got me every time. We actually spent a lot of time going in circles trying to find the basement. This wasn't a real wide-open house. It was designed to be like a maze, with many rooms and fake doors. It took a long time for us to finally find the basement door, and I have to admit, I was nervous to go down there. It was completely pitch black down there. We started to think that it might have been an employees-only area where they kept props. It was just too dark down there to see. It was stated many times that no cell phones were allowed while in the attraction, so we couldn't use cell phone screens as lights. If we wanted to get out of there, we had no choice but to go down there. Each step created a creak more painful to the ears than fingernails scratching on a chalkboard. We were all laughing, telling each other how fucking freaked out we were. I had my hands out in front of me as if I was searching for anything in the complete darkness. I banged into somebody and apologized. "Who was that?" I asked, expecting it to be one of my friends. No answer. Whoever I just bumped into placed their hand on my shoulder, and I took off running and screaming while at the same time laughing. There was something so disturbing about being in that huge pitch-black basement, knowing someone was in there with us. One of my friends thankfully found a key on a desk in the corner of the room. We all ran back upstairs, back to the light, and found the exit door. The actual experience and process of getting through that maze of a haunted house was much longer than my story makes it out to be, but that's not where things got horrifying. Right outside the exit door was a small bin with a sign that said, "Drop keys here, please." That's how the staff would collect the keys and bring them back down to the basement. Halfway off the premises of the haunted house, the exit door opened, and a really tall person dressed in a black robe and bloody pig mask stepped out and started following in our direction. He, or she, though it was most likely a he, so I'll refer to them as a he, appeared to be one of the staff members for the attraction. As we walked further away from the attraction, so did the guy in the costume. It seemed to all of us that he was following us by this point. One of my friends called, "We don't have the key if that's what you want. We dropped it in the little bin." But that didn't do the trick. As a joke, we started running just to see if he would too, and he did. We stopped, and so did he. We stood still, and so did he. At first it was funny, maybe it was just a joke, but as we got closer to my friend Eddie's house, we were starting to discuss if we should reveal where he lives to this guy. He had been following us for at least 5 blocks now, so if it was a joke, it had gone far enough. Eddie's parents were both home, so we felt safe to go inside. Apparently, Eddie's front door was broken, whatever that meant, so we had to go run back. We jokingly waved at the douchebag still following us and walked to Eddie's backyard, shutting the gate behind us. Wiping our feet on his welcome mat on the back door, we heard the gate open. The man emerged from behind the side of the house and began walking towards us once again. this time, much faster. Eddie opened the back door and called to his dad, telling him to get his gun. This seemed to grab the masked man's attention. He slowed down, turned his head to face Eddie. Eddie's dad emerged, angry as hell, and aimed his pistol at the masked coward. He raised his hands up and cried out for him not to shoot, that he's only 27. Eddie's dad told him to get lost and never come back, and the next time he wouldn't think twice about pulling the trigger. Personally, I wish Eddie's dad had made the guy get on his knees and take off the mask, then call the police. That guy got off too easily. For all we know, he could have been armed as well. We contacted the haunted house attraction, and they informed us that they had no such employee dressed in a pig mask.